Welcome everybody to another session of Landlord Tenant University. I'm Sean Kirkwood and I'm here with
Miranda Brewer.
And what Landlord Tenant University is that it is a program sponsored through Neighborhood and Housing Services, and it is our efforts to make government more transparent. And so, due to COVID, we're having our sessions for the foreseeable future all virtual. So make sure you tell somebody and tell somebody we can get up to 100 folks on our Zoom presentations. And in being transparent, we want to make sure that we empower anyone who rents, who owns property, or who is thinking to own property in the city of Kansas City. We want to give them all the tools, all the encouragement, and then we want to also, take the cloudiness off of any regulations, rules and regulations that the city of Kansas City has. We know that, so far in doing our research, we know that there are folks who deal with the housing authority, and they have different rules and regulations versus the city of Kansas City. So this is our effort to make everything as clear and concise as possible, and also to provide contact information. We know during these Zoom sessions, we can't get all the information out there. So, we want to, in making everything transparent, we look to offer sessions about some of the different services that the city of Kansas City has to offer. And then, in an effort that you can follow up, get more, more information, and, hopefully this will make you, want to invest more into the city. And like I said, takes the cloudiness out of owning or renting a property in the city of Kansas City. So today we have two awesome presentations by two different departments. We're going to have our good folks from Human Relations, Mr. Paul Pierce in Human Relations, and they're going to talk to us about housing discrimination. We know it happens. Obviously, we want to do our best to eliminate those factors that make housing discrimination. But at the same time, whether you're discriminating against or somebody who is, Paul is going to kind of walk us through the things you can look for. And then we're also going to have some of our good friends at Healthy Homes. This is our Healthy Homes rental inspection program, and they're through the health department. And so they're going to walk through their presentation as well. Anything, especially, this is for landlords and tenants. But if you find yourself, needing some interior inspections, or you have some questions about living conditions, Healthy Homes can definitely, get you there. We have Mr. Brian Quazon, who's a program manager there, as well as Mr. Joe Williamson, who's a supervisor in Healthy Homes in the health department, and they're going to also be here to answer a few questions. So, without further ado, we're going to start this off with Healthy Homes. They have a very thorough presentation. We're going to do our best to condense this. We're not going to keep you guys very long today, but we will have some times for some Q&A. So if you have some questions, feel free to type those questions in so we can get those to them so they can answer those in as clear and concise as they can. So without further ado, Mr. Joe Williamson and Mr. Brian Quazon.
Thank you very much. My name is Brian Quazon. I'm the program manager of the Healthy Homes Rental Inspection Program. I'm also joined by Joe Williamson. He is the Division Code Enforcement Manager for Environmental Health Services. I'll be doing a lot of the talking when it comes to the presentation. LaRonda, can you pull up the slides? I just want to say thank you to Neighborhood and Housing Services for putting this together, giving us the opportunity to speak to tenants and landlords about the program, some of our procedures, and finally some kind of healthy homes principles, things that we want to be able to address so that way people know how to live healthy and safe.
We're getting that presentation pulled up for you right now.
Thanks. There's some things I can start off talking about. The Healthy Homes program, its mission is really to establish health and safety standards for rental units across the city of Kansas City. The way we intend on achieving that goal is educating tenants and landlords on what healthy rental housing is. And we do that by completing complaint-based inspections to address deficiencies. Our program is a complaint-based program, so we have to receive complaints from tenants or landlords regarding health and safety concerns in order for us to come out and do an inspection. To be able to stay timely, our program has only been around for about 2 years. It passed by the vote of the people back in August 7th of 2018. It passed about 56% for, 44% against. And we were given about a month to begin conducting complaint inspections. So back in September of 2018 is when we started. Looks like we're getting the slides pulled up. I'm on the third slide. So one of the biggest issues that we had was initially HUD properties, whether that be Section 8, Housing Authority, through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they were all exempt because they had people who would come out and do inspections on those properties. What we found was about 20% of the complaints that were coming in were coming from HUD or federally subsidized tenants that were not getting assistance. So in August of 2019, that issue was remedied, and now we're able to inspect all rental properties here in Kansas City, Missouri. And then in December of 2019, the Tenants' Bill of Rights had passed, creating a lot more opportunities for tenants to be able to file complaints, whether it be through human relations or through us. And that started in June of 2020. Next slide. When it comes to what we can actually inspect, our program inspects a wide variety of things, whether it be life safety concerns, kitchen issues, mold, and where we kind of discern or separate ourselves is a lot of times we focus on things on the interior, while Neighborhoods and Housing Services for their codes looks on the exterior. However, my program does look at stuff on the exterior if it impacts things going on the inside. Next slide, please. So what I intend to talk to you all about today is some of the information when it comes to our program policy procedures, walk you through the entire complaint process, as well as talk to you about the some healthy homes principles. So the first thing is we are in charge of getting properties permitted and registered with our program. Every rental unit here in the city is required to get permitted with us. You have to submit an application. It's really a simple application. It's front and back of one page, talking about where the rental housing is, who the contact person is, and that all needs to be filled out one time, and then a permit fee needs to be paid every year, $20 per rental unit. Next slide, please. And this is what our application looks like, and it may be a little difficult to see, but it's just front and back page. It's rental property information, contact information, and some applicable forms that you need to fill out to be able to show us that you are the rental property owner. Next slide. Complaints are filed through one of three ways, through our office directly, 311, or by contacting our phone line. The biggest thing when it comes to our complaints is that the tenant has to allow us in. If we get calls or complaints from the neighbor, if a tenant doesn't allow us in, we're not able to do an inspection. We do receive anonymous complaints from apartment complexes about common areas, those things we can investigate. But if we do not have access to a property, we're not going to invade people's privacy and force our way in. Next slide. So when it comes to the complaints, this year we've had about 1,700 complaints that have been filed with our program, most of which had come in July, and we anticipate there to be ebbs and flows. And this year is no different than anyone else, or any other year. But COVID has obviously created a lot of issues with people staying home, finding issues, using their facilities a whole lot more. So we've received a lot more complaints. Next slide. This is a breakdown of the type of complaints we received. Most of it is water related, whether that be ventilation, mold, pests that come with it. Next slide. And the top violations that we receive are related to those: plumbing issues, mold, moisture, pests, structural, and appliances not being maintained. Next slide. This is our an algorithm, and this is what we're going to basically walk through when it comes to our complaint process. This is available to anyone. It's a public document, and it's been showcased a couple of different times when people want to ask about how this complaint process works. So we'll walk through it. Next slide, please. The inspection process itself is very simple. We receive a complaint, we schedule the complaint, and we conduct an inspection. And then from those findings, we determine if things are health hazardous issues, and we contact the landlords. Next slide, please. So this first portion, we give tenants up to 3 attempts to contact and schedule with them. We do education and eligibility screening. Previously, when we had HUD properties were exempt, we were unable to go and investigate, and it was an exempt property. We also have a lot of people call outside of the city limits, in unincorporated or like Gladstone or those areas. We only do Kansas City, Missouri proper. If the property is eligible, the next thing we do is conduct an on-site inspection. Next slide. We can probably skip to the next one as well. And so we'll conduct an inspection. We'll determine.
Right.
Yeah. And then we'll determine if violations are health hazardous, life-threatening, or non-health hazardous. Next slide, please. So from that, there's really 3 outcomes that we anticipate. Issues where a complaint is not confirmed. We go in for the reported issues. We don't see the issue as a health hazard, non-health hazard. The case is closed. Some cases we come out, the tenant has actually caused the violation, whether that be holes in the walls, harborage-like conditions, those kinds of things. We do education, which is things we'll talk about in a little bit, and then we provide that inspection report. And then the typical thing, which is we come out, we actually see the issue, and we have to determine timeframes for correction. Typically, next slide, please. Typically what happens is health hazards have to be corrected in 5 days, non-health hazards 10 days, life-threatening violations have to be corrected immediately. The way our follow-up process works is after the time frame has lapsed, usually about 5 or 6 days, an inspector will contact the tenant to see if the work's been completed. After that, we'll contact the landlord and look for documentation and verification for those corrections. We are local government. If you don't provide us with that information, the work's not done. So we do need documentation in the form of work orders, photos, invoices, all of those things in order for us to sign off on the documentation and verification. If we do not receive that, or we receive partial or anything like that, then we have to come out and do a re-inspection, and that's the $150 fee for a re-inspection. So next slide, please. Basically, as we walk through it, whether it's partial or all of it, you will either get to a point where you've achieved compliance or not, go through re-inspections. And this is the first time you'll see a fee, is if we have to come out and do a re-inspection, it's $150 re-inspection fee. Next slide, please. So when actually coming into compliance, the biggest things we look for: work orders, photos of that correction, and invoices from vendors. We do not accept bids as compliance. For us, we understand that either 5 to 10 days can be really quick when it comes to correcting violations, especially as it pertains to larger issues. For example, a roof leak, or if you've got to do some foundation work. Right now, it's not conducive to do concrete work or to repair a roof. So we do accept extensions where a compliance plan has to be filled out. So people request extensions on the violations and those time frames, and it has to be approved from our office. So you can't just submit it and expect that I got that time. It has to be approved from our office, and there actually has to be a lot of information that you provide to us. Next slide, please.
Brian, before you go on, just a question.
Yeah.
for the compliance piece. So if there's a piece where the landlord needs to get some sort of permit, is that a piece that can be, granted an extension?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not trying to get people to operate outside of city codes. If an electrician needs to come in to do something with your meter, and obviously you have to file for a permit down at City Planning and Development, those are all things that we can work with, because we're not telling people to operate outside of city codes. That's a great thing. So our compliance plans are quite simple. You are able to tell us what the violation is, the date of abatement that you're intending on getting stuff fixed, and the repair detail. So you have to be able to explain to us all of those things in order for us to have faith that this is going to get fixed. Next slide, please. So when properties don't come into compliance, whether that be through not permitting or failed re-inspections, what ends up happening from it is a GOS, a general order of summons. And for permitting, there's late fees. There are other fees up to $1,000 and jail time. We work with all landlords. We want to get properties into compliance. So that is really our last resort, is to start citing people and doing all that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. One of the things I didn't really touch on is what happens in the case of an emergency situation. Gas leak, carbon monoxide leak, those kinds of things. We want those abated immediately. In some cases, it's less than 24 hours, or in other cases, it's we're not going to leave the site until it's been fixed. So gas leak, carbon monoxide leak right now, carbon monoxide leak could kill all the people that live there. So that would be a terrible thing to happen. And if that ends up happening, a permit suspended, the tenant's relocated, and you have to submit what would be a corrective action plan in order to get your permit back in good standing. Next slide, please. Next things I'm going to run through really quick are housing education. These are the keep it principles. This is nothing I made up. This was from HUD and the National Center for Healthy Housing. So I do not take credit for any of this stuff. I'll just reiterate some of these principles. Those are mostly keep it dry, clean, safe, well ventilated, pest-free, contaminant-free, and home maintained. Next slide. So keeping it dry it seems so easy. However, when we have exposure to excessive moisture or moldy environments, it can lead to a lot of respiratory issues, especially for those people with asthma. Controlling moisture in your home is key, whether that's from the exterior or for the interior. And this issue is relatively prevalent when it comes to Kansas City. Next slide, please. This information came from the American Housing Survey from the census, looking at national data, Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas, and then also for renters in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas. And some of the most prevalent issues that are reported are water in the basement, as well as water from leaking pipes. So being able to control that moisture is extremely important. Next slide. Whether that be from chimney flashing, French drains, gutters, downspouts, all those things can impact water getting into our home. Next slide. So when it comes to how to deal with mold, there's a lot of misinformation. You got to spray it with bleach. You got to use some sort of mold killer or anything like that. The EPA put together a guide, and I'm just going to touch on a couple of those items. The main thing is dealing with the water intrusion or the plumbing leaks themselves, drying that area out completely, and then scrubbing surfaces, mostly with soapy water. That detergent breaks up the mold's hold to a compliant material and basically won't grow back as long as you've addressed how the water is getting in. If you just spray it with bleach, it'll dry out the area. It may kill it, but you need to clean it off for it not to spore and get everywhere again. Some absorbent materials cannot be salvaged. Acoustical ceiling drop-in tiles, they're going to just have to be replaced, because as soon as you start trying to clean them, they disintegrate. The biggest thing is don't paint over moldy surfaces. It's likely to peel, and the issue will not have been abated.
Brian, that's good information, because I've been told that many a times that folks are doing, they have mold issues, and the landlord or they just give you information that says if you just paint over it,
Right.
It'll go away. So I mean, I've heard that several times over the years. So this is quite contrary to what I've heard over the years.
I mean, it's an acceptable final measure at the end after you've addressed how the water is coming in, and then clean the surface. If you just paint over it, it's gonna peel, it's gonna flake, and in all honesty, if there's any abrasion to that surface, it'll start to spore because that mold is a living creature. It wants to get out and it wants to be able to continue to grow. So you got to clean it, you got to dry it, and then the final step is you could paint over it as a measure. Next slide. Next thing is keep it clean. A lot of these principles kind of overlap. And keeping it clean obviously relates to keeping it pest-free, also relates to keeping it contaminant-free. So some of this stuff is really important when it comes to how we clean our house. Main thing is if you're going to vacuum, make sure you have a vacuum that has a HEPA filter. If you find rodent droppings, you don't want to dry sweep it because it'll aerosolize all of those contaminants, and then you're breathing it in. So wet spray it down, use a cloth, clean it up. Don't dust or dry sweep because it just goes into our respiratory systems and we breathe it in. Next slide, please. The next one is a study that was done by the National Sanitation Foundation, where they looked at some of the germiest spots in the home. And if this were in person, I'd have people write down what they think the germiest spots are, but we'll kind of just move through it because I'm already short on time. The number one place is a dish, sponge, and rag, as well as a kitchen sink. Places where we're supposed to prepare our food, clean our dishes to eat again. Those are the dirtiest places. And I find it interesting, down all the way at the bottom, we always hear how dirty money is. But compared to your cell phone or your keys or even your coffee, it pales in comparison to when it comes to the actual germ counts or the bacterial counts compared to all these other household items. Next slide, please.
I see the toilet seat didn't even make the top 10.
Yeah, toilet seat, toothbrush holder. So those people that don't close the lid before they flush, then they brush their teeth. Yeah, just.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you got to do all that, man. Keep it safe. This seems very, very, very simple, but keeping chemicals intact as well as locked away from children, having carbon monoxide detectors if you have gas burning appliances and making sure they work, locking up medications as well as tripping hazards. These things are all things that affect people's safety. Next slide. And when it comes to stairs, obviously being intact, having a handrail if there's more than 3 steps, windows, having non-broken glass, operate as intended. That's not only a safety issue, but an egress issue. Next slide, please. Keeping it well ventilated. This is important because the ventilation system is there to move air, to filter air, to introduce outside air as well as exhausting air. And if we don't have things well ventilated, whether it's in the restroom or in our home, basically you're just going to be continuing to breathe in that same recycled air or that same air that after you've swept up, you're breathing in all those particles that you just swept. Next slide.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Is a bathroom ventilation fan, is that required in each home or each
So
space?
we require a means of ventilation. So whether that's a window or mechanical ventilation or even a transom, depending on the style of home, but you need some way to be able to ventilate. And when it comes to tenants, you got to make sure you run it for at least 15 minutes after you're done. Because whether it's a shower or a bath, all that water vapor has to exit, whether through ventilation, through a window. It's not that fun right now, but yeah, we do require ventilation. One of the most important things, at least especially right now, is gas furnaces and water heaters have to have ventilation to the exterior. Carbon monoxide is a odorless gas and has killed too many people. And not having a CO alarm present in the house with gas burning appliances does violate our rules and regulations. It typically will sound at 70 parts per million. and that's the time when to get out of the house. Next slide, please. Well ventilated also refers to the filters. If you have just that plain fiberglass filter, you'll see here on the MERV rating, it's all the way at the bottom. You got to get it changed every 2 to 3 weeks. And even the ones that are pleated or electrostatic or high efficiency, it's usually every 3 to 4 months. But you need to be careful because the higher the efficiency, the more strain it can put on the system. Keeping it pest-free, that's tenants and landlords working together. They need food, water, and shelter. When it comes to pests, cockroaches are the #1 complaint we see, as well as rodents. Cockroaches can survive up to a month without food, and the worst part is they'll eat dead skin cells, they'll eat feces, they'll eat all of these things to survive. Glue between cardboard. We're getting a lot of cardboard boxes coming, so they will survive on anything. Our way that we tell people to deal with it is integrated pest management. And we can move on to the next slide.
Hey, Brian, I have another question on that as well,
Yeah.
too, that we get frequently, is that every season, we know it's ants season. And so sometimes we'll get phone calls from people saying, hey, I have ants, I can't get rid of them and my landlord doesn't want to take care of them or something. I mean, what, does the city enforce that? I mean, whose responsibility ultimately is it when you have that season, that month or so where ants are getting into spaces?
That's a great question, because pests themselves is highly dependent on individuals. Some people don't care about ants, while other people do. Pest control is required per our rules and regulations that you have to provide it. So to the degree of the kind of issue that you're having when it comes to roaches, rodents, they all have to be treated differently. So whether that be through integrated pest management or a pest control company, you got to be able to treat as those issues arise. And that does require landlords and tenants being able to work together to get those issues fixed. If not, one fails, the whole system fails. So they got to work together.
Definitely.
When it comes to integrated pest management, it is a look from first design, maintenance, the physical system itself, and moving up kind of this risk ladder to finally doing chemical intervention. We don't want a bunch of chemicals being sprayed, because as we move through and we look at contaminants, those things are all things that can affect the way we live, the way we breathe, what we take into our bodies. So we can move to the next slide. When it comes to keeping it contaminant free, main things we looked at are lead and asbestos. Lead paint is obviously a huge contaminant that was used in homes as a flame retardant. And once it starts chipping, breaking, it has negative, terrible effects for young children. Next slide, please. Another huge contaminant that we deal with is smokers. People who smoke, the issue can be is as people smoke and exhale, it can attach to anything, whether it be drapes, carpets, walls even. And as the home heats up over seasons, all that stuff that attaches to the wall can release. If you've seen a home where a smoker's been, even white walls turn yellow or orange even. All those issues, as a home kind of goes through its cycles, they can off gas. And you're basically breathing in all that old smoke that people have had. The same thing when it comes to VOCs, whether it be formaldehydes, plastic chemicals. It's hard to control everything that comes into our home. So the best thing I can do is, if you're concerned about it, make sure you educate yourself so that way you make good choices for yourself. And landlords, please understand that some of those decisions you could be making on behalf of your tenants. So please look into it. Keeping it maintained, once again, references back to some of these things from lead poisoning or asbestos. You can see here, lead poisoning can lead to a lot of issues when it comes to children. So use EPA's lead renovation, repair, and painting rules, as well as that disclosure. If anything's built prior to 1978, I believe, you need to have that disclosure. Next slide. When it comes to asbestos, obviously popcorn ceilings, the shingles, as well as pipe wrappings, those things, it's the friable material. Once it's become damaged, it's being introduced into the air. And these very fine and thin filaments get introduced into our system and are basically almost like little spikes that go into our lungs and can cause a lot of damage. Next slide, please. So when it comes to keeping it maintained, the biggest thing is it applies to everything in your house, whether it be appliances, plumbing systems, HVAC, electrical, all of it. All of those things are things we need to look into to keeping it maintained. And this next slide will probably be the last one since I've already gone through my time. When it comes to tenant reporting, we want tenants and landlords to work together, whether that's from reporting the issues or allowing them to come in and do those repairs. Obviously, if it's a health or safety issue and it's being neglected, contact us. If it's life-threatening, like a gas leak, call Spire. We're not going to be able to do anything any quicker because we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have you call Spire. But if there is an issue, you want us to come and take a look at it. We respond to all complaints at residential rental properties. Currently, with everything going on with COVID, we are out in the field, but we do require social distancing practices as well as masks for our inspectors, as well as the people inside that home, because we will go to someone's home right after. And the last thing we want to do is spread this deadly disease. Besides that, we don't have to go through all the pictures. I will finish my presentation at that. That way, Mr. Pierce has time as well.
No problem. Thank you, Brian. We appreciate it. You know, I am putting up we have a little extra time. I'm putting up just a few of these pictures just so people can kind of just get a glance at what you all see on a regular basis. And just briefly, if you could kind of describe kind of what we're looking at.
Sure, yeah. This bottom one is, we had call that a basement wall was being saturated and had mold growing on it. And when we pulled back the carpet and we took a look, we saw the tack strips were completely saturated and disintegrating. We saw water sitting through the carpet pad and the carpet itself. And as we kind of go through, we show some of the after things that they repaired the carpet in the next slide. They put new tack strips down. They dried out the area, and even on the exterior, they hadn't put down the grass seed yet, but they worked on some of the grading. Obviously, erosion had happened, and it was just going straight against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the slides after that is an issue with the roof. This problem was terrible for this tenant. You can tell all the water that had come through the ceiling, and we had them address not only how the water was getting in, but everything associated with it. Same thing here. Is all of that water-related issue, and I think the person who had lived here before had been a smoker. So you can see right here that discoloration. Next slide.
Is this like a before and after?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Oh, wow. Wow.
You can see that the ceiling material had all kind of fallen down because of all the water that had come in. So they had to repair the ceiling and the roof first before they could address everything else. This is pretty typical in apartment complex bathrooms. There's no mechanical ventilation. The only thing they had was that window. So if that window doesn't open, or they don't open it, then we'll obviously get mold growth around that shower due to all that high moisture. But along with that, they also had a leak from the upstairs neighbor. This is another one that we saw where the guttering system outside had ice dam, and this was over winter. Basically, all the water that had melted down had gone against that brick and had caused a lot of water damage on the interior of that property. So they had to do a lot of They had to do a lot of guttering work, a lot of exterior work. This is a kitchen on the left, if you can believe it. A family, unfortunately, was subject to prior to calling us. You can't see the dates, but it was 10/31, and we had them build a brand new kitchen. Those are probably secondhand cabinets, but it was done within about a week.
That's great. I mean, we're always seeking compliance and everything. You know, I mean, the fact that you all give you work with these landlords and housing providers to allow them to get this. But yeah, some of this stuff is pretty severe. Yeah. And I know during my days of being a code enforcement officer, mold was probably the #1 interior issue that we dealt with. And so, yeah, to see some of these before and after, it kind of brings back chills because I remember being in these properties. So, yeah, I'm glad you guys are enforcing this because we definitely need it.
Yeah.
Um,
And this is something that we try and do all the time is we try and educate tenants because when it comes to mold, you Google something, mold will pop up and you'll think, oh my gosh, this is the end of me. And a lot of times it's really not the case. And when they talk about remediation, a lot of times people want everything torn out and it's not always needed. It kind of depends on the integrity of the system as well as the materials themselves. Sometimes things can be salvaged, sometimes they can't. It's not really up for me to decide unless you can really easily tell that this whole piece has been compromised.
and we have just a couple questions here, real quick, that came in that I see. One is somebody had a question, says, can I withhold rent if I have to pay for pest control or any type of interior modification?
So that is outside of my bounds. When it comes to the Healthy Homes Rental Inspection Program, we are not moderators, we're not mediators. We are telling you that this is an issue inside of this rental property. And so as it pertains to withholding or anything like that, I would tell people usually to get involved with a lawyer or some sort of person that could do more with landlord tenant law.
Very good advice. And this other one kind of is in that same realm. You know, they kind of ask for, can they legally break the lease if mold issues persist? So it sounds like to me that that's also a civil matter as well that we may not want.
Yeah, any of our inspection reports. So we come out and do an inspection. Any of those are obviously under the Sunshine Act. You can request those, and we provide them to landlords and tenants all the time. This is the inspection that we did. Here are the violations we found, as well as the time frames that we instructed for correction.
And then this is also one last kind of personal question, and I know I've gotten this before as well. We've had tenants who've called and maybe they're at the end of their lease and they report some stuff. Does the inspection and therefore the compliance issue, does it follow the tenant or does it follow the property? Meaning that if somebody, they make a complaint about something on the way out of the lease and they move out, we've had people say, I just want to make sure somebody else doesn't go through the same thing that I had to go through for my time. So is there something that needs to be done? I mean, once you guys send out the information and you send out reports, does that have to be completed before they are able to rent their property to another tenant?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Anytime, whether it be the end of their tenancy or they end up leaving the property or whatever, it sticks with the actual residents themselves. So that actual property that's there, we won't allow it. We send out notices after we find out that the property's been vacated, that this property cannot be re-rented until all the violations are corrected. And then we follow up on a routine basis after, whether we have good communication with landlords. Are you intending on re-renting this immediately? Well, if that's the case, you need to fix all of these things, provide it to us, and we'll call you in about a couple of days to a week and see if things have been fixed. If they say, you know what, I'm done with this, I'm gonna sit on it for a little bit and do some rehab, we will follow up with them every couple of weeks to say, is this property still being re-rented? And is this property intended on being re-rented? And if they say yes, hey, you got to fix all this stuff before you can re-rent it. And we'll check to make sure no new utilities have started, no new tenants have been in there. We'll send all of this stuff to them to make sure they're following the rules and regulations and the ordinance.
There's one more question, Sean. There's one question in the Q&A. It says, who do you call when you have a mold issue?
So if you have a mold issue, you can contact us. We do investigate mold complaints. Our phone number is 816-513-6347. I will say we don't test mold. We don't leave out monitors to see whether or not what kind of mold it is, whether it's Aspergillus or anything like that. But we treat molds as suspect mold. Are the conditions present and are the physical properties there for us to be able to say this is suspect mold? In the end, they will all have to treat them the same way. Dry out the area, clean the surface, and if it's not a compromised material, reseal it. You know, following the EPA's guide when it comes to mold in the home.
Okay.
If they want a specific mold test, they would have to contact some sort of third party or get one of those tests that send out to the lab. But we do look for mold and suspect mold material.
Well, thank you very much, Brian and Joe. We appreciate the information, and we hope that this information can help once again empower both our housing providers as well as our tenants out there. You know, this kind of, once again, it takes the mystery out of what's enforceable and what's not enforceable. I think especially during this time of year when, you know, and adding to that with COVID, we have more people spending more times in their homes. So, you know, we just want to make sure that they're living healthy and they're able to breathe and enjoy their property. So this definitely takes the mystery out. We have your contact information there as well. And then we're going to make this presentation readily available as well. So we can email this presentation out. It's very thorough. And we think any, you know, housing, neighborhood leaders and housing groups, if you all want this information, please feel free to reach out to us at our tenant and landlord university emails. We can get these emailed right out to you. So once again, Brian and Joe, we definitely appreciate your time, and we appreciate the work you all are doing over in the health department. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And just know that the rules and regulations, I didn't touch as much on them, but it's about 35, 40 pages, and it's available on our website. If you have specific code related questions or wondering if it's enforceable, it's a PDF on kcmo.gov/health, search healthy homes. It'll be there.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you. And with that being said, were we able to get Mr. Paul Pierce on?
I believe Mr. Pierce is on.
Okay. Let's see here. Mr. Pierce, are you on right now with us?
I thought he's listed as a participant, Miranda, but I don't know if he needs to be.
Let's try to see if we can get Mr. Paul Pierce on with the Fair Housing Group here to give us some more much needed information. And while we're looking for Mr. Pierce here, just to let you know as well, feel free to email us as well to let us know any topics that we should be looking to cover. Anything that's, you know, we're also in Neighborhood and Housing Services. We're keeping our eyes on a federally mandated moratorium on evictions. We know that expires at the end of this month. We don't know if they're going to have any extensions. So, you know, we will definitely keep you abreast as we get information. And we will also try to get you connected to as many resources as we can here in Neighborhood and Housing Services, as well as some of our partnering organizations. But you know, that's what we aim to do here is educate and to empower. So sometimes we're not able to catch all of the resources out there. So if there's any resources or if there's any you know, topics that we can cover and be as transparent as we can, we would be happy to hear from you. So at this time, I think I see you here, Paul. Are you able to hear us? Okay.
I can't hear you. Hope you all can hear me.
We can.
Hey, Paul.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to come on and share with you. My name is Paul Pierce. I'm a civil rights investigator in the Kansas City Human Relations Department, and I'll just talk a little bit while Ms. Brewer pulls up our brief presentation. We just are grateful for the opportunity to come on and share with you about what the Human Relations Department does with regards to fair housing enforcement in conjunction with our partners and our colleagues in neighborhoods and the great work that they do, as well as in the health department with regard to the Healthy Homes Initiative. I won't be long, but if there are questions, feel free to go ahead and submit those, and I'll answer them the best that I can. If you see there are the slide that's in front of us, Civil Rights Division, I won't read all of this. I'm sure you all can read it over for yourselves, but in addition to investigating complaints in employment and in public accommodations, there are a number of housing complaints that we are able to investigate. And every complaint, whether it's a public accommodations, employment, or a housing complaint, has to have a basis. And so the housing ordinance that we enforce has 5 protected categories. If we go to the next slide, we'll see what those are and go into some brief detail about each one of those. As you can see, age, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, and retaliation are the categories that are protected under our ordinance. And I bring that up because near the end, I'll make an important distinction with regard to complaints that aren't covered by our ordinance, but that still can be investigated by other agencies. Look at age. Under our ordinance, someone who is 18 or over is protected, meaning that anyone who can enter into a contract for necessity someone who
Hold on, Paul.
of entering into a contract can be covered under our ordinance, which is different from employment, as it says here. Under employment law, for someone to file a case based on age, they have to be at least 40 years old. So there's a slight distinction between the housing ordinance and our employment ordinance. If we go to the next slide, an example of a complaint based on age discrimination, the applicant is denied a housing opportunity based on their age, even though that person is otherwise qualified. Or if a housing provider refuses to make repairs for tenants of a certain age group while treating tenants of different age groups more favorably. And that's important to have that information because as an investigator, we would be responsible for being able to make comparisons between the treatment of the person who has filed the complaint compared to those who are similarly situated, in this case of different age groups, who receive more favorable treatment. And we'll get into some more about the types of complaints that we investigated shortly. With regard to marital status, the concept that this covers is that there are opportunities that are denied to or could be denied to a single person or a single family as opposed to a married couple or someone who is or may not be married, where someone is otherwise, if someone unreasonably gives a preference in favor to a married couple over someone who is not married or vice versa. And marital status and all these different categories that we're talking about are defined in our ordinance. The next is sexual orientation and gender identity. While they are separate categories, many times they are sort of put together. And as you see here in our ordinance, sexual orientation is defined in section 38 of our ordinances, which is the human relations ordinance. And the definition section is section 1 and subsection A. And sexual orientation, as you see here, is actual or perceived heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality. Gender identity is a little different. It is the actual perceived appearance, expression, identity, or behavior of a person as being male or female, whether or not that appearance, expression, identity, or behavior is different from that traditionally associated with the person's designated sex at birth. And that gender identity, how one describes that or how one articulates that is from the perspective of the person who is being identified. And it's that person's identity that's covered here, not so much society's sort of stereotype as to what a male is or what a female is. The next slide is retaliation. And as you see there's a short definition of what retaliation is. Basically that if someone files a complaint of housing discrimination, serves as a witness during the course of an investigation, testifies in a lawsuit, or any manner in which any manner comes under our ordinance, or even after, as you see under the Fair has been filed and investigated, it is retaliatory for a housing provider or landlord to take action against that person who otherwise what's called engages in a protected activity, that they oppose some type of discriminatory practice. In the next slide, section 38-1 of our city ordinances lists pretty much the types of complaints that we investigate with regards to housing discrimination. And there's a pretty extensive list in section 105 that deals with various types of housing discrimination complaints, whether it is an advertisement, when someone advertises a rental unit as being available, and someone in one of the 4 distinct categories that are covered by our ordinance inquires about that opportunity, and because of the membership in that protected category, it's no longer available, or there are conditions placed on that availability that aren't placed on individuals not in that protected category. That's just an example of one of the causes of action, for lack of a better phrase, under 38 section 105. And it's important to note in the next point there, that certain properties and certain types of complaints can be investigated by our department, meaning that the most recent act of alleged discrimination took place within 100 days of filing. The property has to be within the city limits of Kansas City, Missouri. And the person who wants to file, is at least 18 years old or older. Now, I mentioned before, when we talked about age, a parent or guardian would have to file on behalf of a potential complainant who is under 18. So, for example, if a parent wants to co-sign for their 17-year-old to rent a house or rent an apartment while they're in college or something like that, that person would be covered as long as that parent or that guardian files on their behalf. So those 3 points there on the previous slide basically lay out the city's jurisdiction with regard to the complaints that we can investigate within our city limits. And then finally, if someone feels that they've been discriminated against on a basis other than the ones that are covered by our ordinance, meaning race, skin color, national origin, sex, mental or physical disability, familial status, or ethnic background, or if that person is the victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, that person can still file a fair housing complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, over in Kansas City, Kansas, and you see their phone number there. There are certain protected categories, as you see, that are not covered by our ordinance, but that doesn't mean that that complaint still cannot be investigated. It just won't be investigated by Human Relations, and that's important to remember. So if you feel like for example, your rental property or your unit is not accessible due to, and you have a disability, you can contact HUD, or you can still contact Human Relations, but we would refer you to HUD because statute, HUD is able to address that, and for right now, we're not, which is another discussion for another time. But at any rate, if you have questions about what is covered by our ordinance, what types of complaints that we can investigate, and it's a good thing that the young man from Healthy Homes was on the line, because we got complaints about issues with mold and water damage, faucets or pipes leaking through light fixtures, and things of that nature. For anyone to live in that situation, I wouldn't want you to think that Human Relations can necessarily handle that for you, because that's a health issue. And so we would refer you to the health department, because that would be the best place for you to get the relief that you're seeking. Not that we don't want to help you, but we don't want anyone, sort of spinning their wheels. And that's why we're doing this today, so that you can go to the right place when you have, so if you have questions, we have a couple, and I'll be glad to answer those questions if we have time.
There's like 3 questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
Sean, if you want to do those, or how do you want to?
If you don't mind reading them.
Hey, Paul, how are you, buddy? Good to see you. The first question is,
how are you?
I'm good. What if the tenant is handicapped is the first question.
Okay. Well, if a tenant has a mental or physical disability and they feel that they're being discriminated against in the terms or conditions of their rental, or their unit is not accessible, they can contact Housing and Urban Development at the 913-551-5462 number that you see on the screen there. Those complaints would be best investigated by HUD. They have the authority. They have authority obviously the city doesn't have, being that they're a federal agency and we're a city agency. So if you have a disability, mental or physical, you should contact HUD if you feel like you're being discriminated against.
Perfect. All right. Question 2. Due to COVID-19, if you have a valid complaint against your landlord, can you still file a complaint?
Yes, you can. You see the department number there, 816-513-1836. If you call that number and ask for someone in the Civil Rights Division, one of us, once we've established our jurisdiction, our authority to investigate that complaint, we can send you out an intake form. You can fill it out, explain why you believe you're being discriminated against, given the bases that are covered under our ordinance. And then we would have you send that back, generate a complaint form, and that would start our investigation process. So you can call that number, 513-1836, ask for someone in the Civil Rights Division, and we'll be glad to talk to you about how you go about filing a complaint.
Perfect. And the third question I have here is, if you haven't paid your rent, can you still file a complaint?
Well, yes, I believe you can still file a complaint. And it's good that you had mentioned, Brian, and there was some discussion about situations where people should or shouldn't have to pay rent. I personally would never advise someone not to pay their rent, even if they feel like they're being discriminated against. However, if you do decide to withhold your rent, the best thing to do is to hold that money in escrow, because at some point, the landlord will probably move to file some type of eviction. And the first thing the judge probably is going to ask you is, do you have your rent? And if you have it in an account separate from your other monies, or you have it somewhere, then that will be, I think, good evidence for you at that time if you're ever asked about your rent during an eviction proceeding. But there's just a limited number of situations where a tenant may or may not be liable for rent, and it has to do with the habitability, I believe, of the structure, whether it's burned out by fire or damaged in a flood, something of that nature. So I wouldn't necessarily withhold rent. A good idea, if you have a question like that, would be to contact legal aid. I know they're part of this group of agencies that are assisting landlords and tenants in these situations. So I would contact someone in legal aid with that question.
Thank you.
That is the last one. Thank you, Paul.
Hey, Paul, I
Sure.
do have one more kind of question.
Yes.
Based on a phone call I received probably about a week and a half ago. And I do believe I referred this person over to you all, so I don't know if they've reached out. Looking at your definition of retaliation, I see what it is, but I had a tenant who called me, and he just told me that when he moved into his apartment complex or to his building, the landlord, commented that, hey, you're a good-looking guy. I'm sure you got all the girls coming over and all this kind of good stuff. So, just whatever it was, banter or inappropriate, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was that once, at some point in time, the landlord came under the impression that the tenant was homosexual, and with that being said, they haven't did anything by definition. The landlord hasn't did anything by definition of retaliation yet, but he just went from a very cordial landlord who's frequently on the property to now the tenant is complaining that he's just a jerk. And he goes out of his way to say things. So he hasn't retaliated by this definition, but you know, my tenant is now kind of feeling uneasy and doesn't necessarily want to live there, but he's paying his rent, he's doing everything he needs to do. What about those type of complaints where it's not retaliation by definition, but there's clearly a change in relationship or anything of that nature?
Oh, that's a good question. And this may not be a good answer for the person who asked that if they're listening, but it's not against the law for someone not to be nice. I mean, the law doesn't force people to act right, per se. Now, having said that, in situations where, for example, as a tenant, you make requests for repairs, whether it's calling the office, calling the landlord or maintenance person directly, leaving something in writing or what have you. And you do that over and over and over and over again for the same thing or for something different. And because you make those repair requests, now all of a sudden you get the treatment that you're talking about where the landlord just isn't as friendly as they used to be. In some cases, that could be retaliatory, only because, as you said, the first prong of any retaliation complaint is the engagement in a protected activity, complaining about some type of discriminatory treatment. Now, not being nice to me is not discriminatory. I don't hope for the people that are listening that you're not nice to your tenants or you're not nice to your landlord. That's just not the right thing to do. However, the withdrawal of what are called friendly courtesies is a form of retaliation that is recognized in employment cases. But again, it starts with the complaint of some type of discriminatory treatment, the opposition to discriminatory treatment that triggers this behavior of no longer being as friendly as you used to be.
Okay, thank you very much. One last question, and I think we'll have you off the hot seat, is that on average, I mean, I know these are case by cases, but on average, from a start to a finish of any of these type of, discriminatory practices that you all may investigate, what is a realistic kind of estimated time frame from beginning to hopefully corrected behavior or resolution?
Well, we try to complete a housing investigation within 100 days. I mean, that's the goal that we've set for ourselves. Now, during the course of that process, and we do this with every complaint that comes in the department, if the parties agree to some type of early resolution, whether it's some type of negotiation back and forth with the investigator as sort of the in between the two parties, or if the parties want to go to mediation, I mean, that's something that's available as soon as the complaint is served on the respondent. And we encourage that. It's not mandatory and there's no cost. So if a landlord does get served with a complaint from our department and they would like to take that complaint to mediation, as long as the complaining party agrees, we'll select a mediator. That person will meet with both sides and they can mediate that complaint. If it's done in less than 100 days, that's great.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Paul. We appreciate it. We think this information was very helpful. We've been getting quite a bit of those phone calls as well. So now we kind of know how to direct. And once again, just like the previous presentation, we'll make this presentation public. So anybody who wants to get this, please feel free to email us. But once again, Paul, we're thankful for the work that you do, and this has been very informative. Do we have a link to our contact information?
Yes, we do.
Okay. We'll link our contact information. We want you guys to stay in tune to Tenant Landlord University. We look forward to bringing you all relevant information moving forward. Hopefully everybody has a great holiday season. And we look forward to getting back with you all after the first of the year. We'll be rolling out a slate of sessions and classes that, once again, we think that are relevant. But if you all have any ideas or any suggestions on classes that we can offer, we'll be happy to get these things together for you. And then as well, as I mentioned to Brian the other day, as well as Paul, about quarterly, we want to bring these presenters back to give us any updated information, because we know these issues don't go away. And so maybe around the spring of the year, we'll look forward to bringing you all back to kind of just, rehash this information, get it out here, and hopefully we'll grow our audience and we can have more educated and empowered folks who are making, our city better. So hopefully you guys can see it on your screen is our contact information. Once again, I'm Sean Kirkwood, the program manager. We have Lorena Brewer here, the program assistant. Please feel free to email us at our landlord.university@kcmo.org email, or tenant.university@kcmo.org. We check those emails daily and throughout the day. We're answering all types of information and making referrals. Also, too, we have Miss Tiffany Drummer, who has joined us. She's our tenant housing specialist. Tiffany, she can help in a myriad of things, from evictions to hopefully getting you, if you find yourself in the need of housing assistance, she can get you directed to some of our partnering organizations that can get you housing assistance. So we look forward to bringing her on in January to kind of talk about what she does. And, once again, we want to make this a very inclusive program. So feel free to talk about us. Feel free to tell neighbors, because once again, we want to bring you relevant information. So with all that being said, we're going to close out today. Look for emails from us about our January sessions. And once again, thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
My pleasure.